Good morning, everybody, and welcome back from spring break. I don't know when you're watching this, but for me, it's the first Monday after spring break. It is rainy. I'm looking out my window. The phone is like in my windowsill, so I'm looking past the phone out my window, and it's raining, and it's actually kind of nice because most of spring break was sunny, and I don't know. I'm kind of enjoying the rain and the quiet, and let's just take a slow welcome back into school. What school looks like right now. So I'm excited to read with you today. We are on chapter 12 of The Trumpet of the Swan by E.D. White. Chapter 12 is called A Rescue. So in chapter 11, the last thing we saw was Louie playing taps as all the boys at camp were going to sleep. In chapter 12, A Rescue, we have some vocabulary words. We're going to be hearing the word blundering, malodorous, reputation, untarnished, and hippie. Those are some of the words we're going to be introduced to in chapter 12, and I'd love for you to write in a notebook and draw some pictures of what they mean, and I'm going to let you pause if you need any more time to write those down, but I'm going to keep going because I'm excited to read this to you. Chapter 12, A Rescue. Louis liked to sleep at the lake. At night, after blowing taps, he would waddle down to the sandy beach by the dock. There, he removed his slate, his chalk pencil, and his trumpet, and hid them under a bush. Then he shoved off into the water. As soon as he was afloat, he would tuck his head under a wing. For a while, he would doze and think about home and his parents. Then he would think about Serena, how beautiful she was, and how much he loved her. Pretty soon, he would fall fast asleep. When daylight came, he would swim ashore and eat a light breakfast of water plants. Then he'd put on his things, climb onto the flat rock, and blow reveille. The boys, hearing the trumpet, would wake and rush to the dock to swim before breakfast. After supper at night, the campers would often play volleyball. Louis loved the game. He couldn't hop around as fast as the boys, but he could reach far out with his long neck and poke the ball into the air and over the net. It was very hard to get a ball past Louis. He could return almost any shot. When the boys chose sides at the start of the game, Louis was always the first to be chosen. The boys loved camp life in Ontario. They learned how to handle a canoe. They learned how to swim. Sam Beaver took them on nature walks and taught them to sit quietly on a log and observe wild creatures and birds. He showed them how to walk in the woods without making a lot of noise. Sam showed them where the kingfisher had his nest, in a hole in the bank by a stream. He showed them the partridge and her chicks. When the boys heard a soft cuckoo, cuckoo, Sam told them they were listening to the saw-it owl, smallest of the owls, no bigger than a man's hand. Sometimes in the middle of the night, the whole camp would wake to the scream of a wildcat. Nobody ever saw a wildcat during the entire summer, but his scream was heard at night. One morning, when Sam was playing tennis with Applegate Skinner, Sam heard a clanking noise. He looked behind him, and there, coming out of the woods, was a skunk. The skunk's head was stuck in a tin can. He couldn't see where he was going. He kept bumping into trees and rocks, and the can went clank, clank, clank. That skunk is in trouble, Sam said, laying down his racket. He's been to the dump looking for food. He poked his head into that empty can, and now he can't get it out. The word spread quickly through camp that a skunk had arrived. The boys came running to see the fun. Mr. Brickle wanted them to not get too close. The skunk might squirt them. So the boys danced around, keeping their distance and holding their noses. The big question was how to get the can off the skunk's head without getting squirted. He's going to need help, said Sam. That skunk will starve to death if we don't get that can off. All the boys had suggestions. One boy said they should make a bow and arrow, tie a string to the arrow, and shoot the arrow at the can. Then, when they hit the can, they could pull the string and the can would come off the skunk's head. Tie a string. Nobody thought much of that suggestion. It sounded like too much work. I was just trying to think to myself, How was the arrow? I guess they thought the arrow was going to puncture the can and stay there. I was trying to figure out how it would pull the can off, but anyway, they didn't use that idea. Another boy suggested that 2 boys climb a tree, and one boy could hang by his feet from the other boy's hands, and when the skunk walked under the tree, the boy who was hanging by his feet could reach down and pull the can off. And if the skunk squirted, the perfume wouldn't hit the boy because he would be hanging in the air. Nobody thought much of that suggestion either. Mr. Brickle didn't like it at all. He said, well, I have to turn the page. He said it was extremely impractical, and furthermore, he wouldn't permit it. Another boy suggested that they get a block of wood, smear it with glue, and when the skunk knocked against it, the can would stick to the block of wood. Nobody thought much of that suggestion either. Mr. Brickle said he didn't have any glue anyway. So they have a problem, don't they? And they have lots of possible suggestions, which is something we talk about a lot in reading when we're going through stories and there's a problem and solution, and we'll say, well, what was the problem and what were some of the possible solutions, and then what ended up being the actual solution, what solved the problem. Let's see what's really going to solve the problem. While everybody was making their suggestions, Sam Beaver walked quietly into his tent. He returned in a few minutes with a long pole and a piece of fishing line. Sam tied one end of fishing line to the pole. Then he tied a slip knot in the other end of the line and formed a noose. Then he climbed to the roof of the porch and asked the other boys not to get too close to the skunk. The skunk, all this time, was blundering around, blindly bumping into things. It was a pitiful sight. Sam, holding his pole, waited patiently on the roof. He looked like a fisherman waiting for a bite. When the skunk wandered close to the building, Sam reached over, dangled the noose in front of the skunk, slipped the noose around the can, and gave it a jerk. The noose tightened, and the can came off. As it did so, the skunk turned around and squirted right at Mr. Brickle, who jumped back, stumbled, and fell. All the boys danced around, holding their noses. The skunk ran off into the woods. Mr. Brickle got up and dusted himself off. The air smelled strong of skunk stink. Mr. Brickle did too. "Congratulations, Sam," said Mr. Brickle. "You have aided a wild creature and have given Camp Kookooskoos a delicious dash of wild perfume. I'm sure we'll all remember this malodorous event for a long time to come. I don't see how we can very well forget it." "Go!" cried Louie, lifting his trumpet. The lake echoed with the sound. The air was heavy with the rich, musky smell of skunk. The boys danced and danced, holding their noses. Some of them held their stomachs and pretended to throw up. Then Mr. Brickle announced it was time for the morning swim. "A swim will clear the air," he said, as he walked away toward his cottage to change his clothes. After lunch each day, the campers went to their tents for a rest period. Some of them read books, some of them wrote letters home, telling their parents how bad the food was, and some just laid on their cots and talked. One afternoon during rest period, the boys in Applegate's tent began teasing him about his name. "Applegate Skinner," said one boy. "Where'd you get such a crazy name, Applegate?" "My parents gave it to me," replied Applegate. "I know what his name is," said another boy. "Sour Applegate, Sour Applegate Skinner." The boys laughed at this and began chanting, "Sour apple, Sour apple, Sour Applegate." "This is making me feel bad. Is it making you feel bad?" "Yeah, I'm having empathy for Applegate, and I'm feeling bad for him because it doesn't feel good when people laugh at you and make fun of something about you that might be different, like his name is different. I'm also remembering in Chrysanthemum when the kids were making fun of her name. It's kind of the same. I don't like it. I guess we'll have to see what happens." "Stop that!" bellowed the tent leader. Good for him. It's about time somebody stood up and said something. "I don't think it's funny," said Applegate. "His name isn't Sour Applegate," whispered another boy. "His name is Wormy Applegate. Wormy Applegate Skinner." This suggestion was greeted with screams of laughter. So the tent leader told them to stop, but they didn't. They just started doing it quiet, trying to be sneaky. "I said quiet," bellowed the tent leader. I want quiet in this tent, and I want you to leave Applegate alone. Leave rotten Applegate alone, whispered another boy. And some of the other boys had to pull their pillows over their head so their snickering couldn't be heard. Applegate was sore. Now, back then, when someone would say sore, it didn't mean like you fell and got hurt. Like sometimes I'll say, oh, my arm is sore because I worked out too hard or something like that. He meant his feelings were hurt. He was sore meant that his feelings were hurt and he was angry and sad. When rest period was over, he wandered down to the dock. He didn't like being made fun of, and he wanted to do something to get even. Without saying anything to anybody, he slid a canoe into the water and paddled out onto the lake, heading for the opposite shore, a mile away. No one noticed him. Applegate had no business taking a canoe out all alone. He had not even passed his swimming test. He had not passed his canoe test. He was disobeying camp rules. When he was a quarter of a mile away from shore, in deep water, the wind grew stronger. The waves got higher, and the canoe was hard to manage. Applegate got scared, and suddenly a wave caught the canoe and spun it around. Applegate leaned hard on his paddle, and his hand slipped. He lost balance. The canoe tipped over. Applegate found himself in the water. His clothes felt terribly soggy and heavy. His shoes dragged him down, and he could barely keep his head above water. Instead of hanging onto the canoe, he started swimming towards shore, which was a crazy thing to do. One wave hit him square in the face, and he got a mouthful of water. "Help!" he screamed. "Help me! I'm drowning! It'll give the camp a bad name if I drown! Help! Help!" Counselors sprinted to the waterfront. They jumped into canoes and rowboats and started for the drowning boy. One counselor kicked his moccasins off, dove in, and began swimming toward Applegate. Mr. Brickle raced to the dock, climbed to the diving tower, and directed the rescue operation, shouting through a megaphone. "Hang on to the canoe, Applegate!" he shouted through the megaphone. "Don't leave the canoe!" But Applegate had already left the canoe. He was all alone, thrashing about and wasting his strength. He felt sure he would soon go to the bottom and drown. He felt weak and scared. Water had got into his lungs, and he couldn't last much longer. The first boat to get away from the dock was rowed by Sam Beaver, and Sam was pulling hard at the oars, straining every muscle. But things didn't look good for Applegate. The boys were still a long way from the boy. The boats were still a long way from the boy. When the first cry of help was heard in camp, Louis was coming around the corner of the main lodge. He spied Applegate immediately and responded to the call. "I can't fly out there," thought Louis, "because my flight feathers have been falling out lately, but I can certainly make better time than these boats." Before we go on, I want to talk about that. Several times in the book, E.B. White has referenced flight feathers. And something that I really didn't know until I read this was that swans literally cannot fly at certain times of the year because they don't have their flight feathers at those times. They can only fly at certain times of the year when they have their flight feathers. I didn't know that before. So Louis can't fly right now because his flight feathers have been falling out. Dropping his slate and chalk pencil and his trumpet, Louis splashed into the water and struck out, beating his wings and kicking with his great webbed feet. A swan, even in summer when he can't fly, can scoot across the water at high speed. Louis's powerful wings beat the air and his feet churned the waves as though he were running on top of the water. In a moment, he had passed all the boats. When he reached Applegate, he quickly dove, pointed his long neck between Applegate's legs, and came up to the surface with Applegate on his back. So this is what Louis did. He swam out really, really fast, and he went up under Applegate, and he got him on his back. And you can see the illustrator showed how windy it is. And you can also see that the illustrator showed that Applegate was not wearing a life preserver, a life jacket, which is scary. Cheers came from the people on the shore and in the boats. Applegate clung to Louis's neck. He had been saved in the nick of time. Another minute and he would have gone to the bottom. Water would have filled his lungs and he would have been a goner. Thank God, shouted Mr. Brickle through his megaphone. Great work, Louie. Camp Cacoose will never forget this day. The reputation of the camp has been saved, and our record for safety is still untarnished. Louie didn't pay much attention to all the shouting. He swam very carefully over to Sam's boat, and Sam pulled Applegate into the boat and helped him into the stern seat. You look pretty funny riding a swan, Sam said, and you're lucky to be alive. You're not supposed to go out alone in a canoe. But Applegate was too scared and wet to say anything. He just sat and stared straight ahead, spitting water out of his mouth and breathing hard. At supper that night, Mr. Brickle placed Louie at his right in the place of honor. When the meal was over, he rose and made a speech. We all saw what happened on the lake today. Applegate Skinner broke a camp rule, took a canoe out alone, and upset. Upset in this word means that the canoe tipped over. He was drowning when Louie the Swan, rapidly outdistancing all other campers, reached his side, held him up, and saved his life. Let us all give Louie a standing ovation. The boys and the counselors stood up and cheered and clapped and beat on their tin plates with spoons. Then they sat down. Louie looked embarrassed. And now, Applegate, said Mr. Brickle, I hope the rescue has caused you to change your opinion of birds. The first day you were here in camp, you told us you didn't care for birds. How do you feel now? I feel sick at my stomach, replied Applegate. It makes you sick to your stomach to almost drown. My stomach still has a lot of water in it. Yes, but what about birds? Asked Mr. Brickle. Apple thought hard for a moment. Well, he said, I'm grateful to Louie for saving my life, but I still don't like birds. Really? Said Mr. Brickle. That's quite remarkable. Even though a bird saved you from drowning, you don't care for birds. What have you got against birds? Nothing, replied Applegate. I have nothing against them. I just don't care for them. Okay, said Mr. Brickle. I guess we'll just have to leave it at that, but the camp is proud of Louie. He's our most distinguished counselor, a great trumpet player, a great bird, a powerful swimmer, and a fine friend. He deserves a medal. In fact, I intend to write a letter recommending that he be given the life-saving medal. Mr. Brickle did as he was promised. He wrote a letter, and a few days later, a man arrived from Washington with a life-saving medal. And while all the campers watched, he hung the medal around Louie's neck alongside the trumpet, the slate, and the chalk pencil. It was a beautiful medal. Engraved on it were the words, to Louie the Swan, who with outstanding courage and complete disregard for his own safety, saved the life of Applegate Skinner. Louie took off his slate and wrote, Thank you for the medal. It is a great honor. But he thought to himself, I'm beginning to get overloaded with stuff around my neck. I've got a trumpet, a slate, a chalk pencil. Now I've got a medal. I'm beginning to look like a hippie. I hope I'll still be able to fly when my flight feathers grow in again. That night, when darkness came, Louie blew the most beautiful taps he had ever blown. The man who had brought the medal was listening and watching. He could hardly believe his ears and eyes. When he returned to the city, he told people what he had seen and heard. Louie's fame was growing. His name was known. People all over were beginning to talk about the swan who could play a trumpet. Well, Louie was a hero, wasn't he? Pretty great. Chapter 13 is called The End of Summer, and I really look forward to reading it with you. I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.